Well, I'll go ahead and I've got my bullet points of things I'm supposed to do here. So I'm going to go ahead and start that. I'm Brooks Vostel from BGSU, and I'm going to be the session moderator, which primarily means that I will be monitoring the chat. So if you have questions for any of our presenters, or if you need anything specific, you can send a message to me or to everyone. If you haven't used the chat before, you can direct message me if you need something, or if you need to ask me something. If it's a question that you would like to share with everyone, please go ahead and put it in the everyone chat. I'll monitor those and I'll interrupt the presenters at an opportune time to make sure they hear those questions. At this point, I'll introduce our presenters, meaning I'm going to read your names from a list, but I'll let you all talk about yourself. So we have Allison Godey, Gabriel Matney, Jeremy Nadler, Nancy Patterson, and Joanna Weaver, all from BGSU, who are going to be talking to us about lesson study and the power of collaboration. I believe we already figured out that Joanna has control in order to put up PowerPoints and all of that. So with that, here's our presenters. Thank you very much for being here. At the end of the session, I can review the directions on how to get into your second session. So I'll jump in at the end. Presenters, go to it.
Thank you so much. I want to welcome everybody. Let me share my screen. I'm Joanna, by the way. I am the AYA-ILA content coordinator at BGSU, and I'm also one of the leaders of Project Impact along with Tracy. Well, she might be this way to you or that way to you or that way to you, but she's next to me this way. Anyway, I'm just really glad everybody's here. Let me share my screen so we can get ourselves started. And I apologize for all the junk you're going to see on my screen before it gets there. All right. Do you all want me to do the presenter screen or just keep the slides off to the left? My team, what are you thinking?
You can keep them off to the left, but you need to like arrange it so that the slide is as large as possible in that space.
So I think presenter screen's good.
I do too, because that really makes it bigger. All right, so here we are. Wonderful. So again, I wanted to welcome you. And we're talking about lesson study and collaboration. Gabriel, do you want to jump in here and talk about lesson study and what the whole concept of lesson study is?
Yeah, thanks, Joanna. So something that I'm wondering if we could do real quick, and if Joanna doesn't mind, could you just stop sharing? And since we have a small group, it would be nice to hear from those who are not presenting, who they are, whether they're in service or pre-service, and whether or not they know anything about lesson study. On a scale of 1 to 5, where would you position yourself in knowledge about lesson study? That'll help us as we proceed in talking about the rest of our presentation. So if it's okay, and I know Zoom kind of reorients everyone's pictures, so it gets awkward to know who's next. So I'll just call your name if it's okay. And if you just share a little bit about, again, yourself, whether you're in service or pre-service, and on a scale of 1 to 5, where would you position yourself in lesson study? Sarah, would you mind going first?
Yeah, hi, I'm Sarah. I'm pre-service and I'm an IEC major. And I have a dog, Zinger, and he was just like on here and I really care about him. And I also have a younger sister. We're only 19 months apart, so we're pretty close.
Okay, very cool. Do you know anything about lesson study?
No, I do not.
Okay, great. Good to have you here. You're in the right place.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Gabriel,
Yeah.
I know you're going to call names, but why don't we, because you were saying ranking, how much they know about lesson study from 1 to 5. Could we put that in the chat?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Could everyone put in the chat what you're ranking 1 to 5? You really know 1, you know nothing at all, and put that in the chat, and then we can continue with introductions.
That's a good idea. Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, so Zachary, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, hi guys. I'm Zach Lichty. I'm a currently pre-service teacher out at Fremont City Schools. Loving it so far. And when it comes to lesson study, I have vague like recollections of it, but I can't confidently say I know much about it.
Kenzie.
Hi, I'm Mackenzie Weaver. I'm a second year social studies teacher in South Carolina. I graduated from BGSU in 2019 with my undergrad, and then just this past December 2020 with my master's in classroom technology. Woo! I don't think I could give you a definition of what lesson study is. I have heard, well, she's over here to me, but I've heard my mom talk about it like millions of times, but I couldn't tell you, and I didn't ask either. So don't know anything about it.
Okay, great. We're glad to have you here, and we're hoping that your weather down there is going to be better than ours this week as the snow comes.
For sure.
Erin, can you share with us a little bit about who you are? Am I pronouncing that right, Erin?
Yes. Hi, I'm Erin Hinkle. I have 21 years teaching math at Perrysburg High School.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Marie.
Yes, hi, I'm Marie. I'm an IEC major at BGSU, and I'm a senior this year, and I do not know a lot about lesson study, so I'm very excited to learn about that.
All right, thanks for being here. And lastly, Karen, and then the rest of us are either Project Impact or presenting.
Hi, I'm Karen Ebach. I am a faculty member at BGSU in the College of Business. I teach supply chain management. I've been teaching for over 20 years. I am not familiar with the term lesson studies, but based on the diagram that was briefly on there, it looks very similar to a plan, do, check, act model that we have in supply chain in our total quality management. So I'm interested in learning more.
Fantastic. I like the connection too. That's great. And Joe, I know you just got back. I know you were here and then you left. What we were doing is just kind of sharing a little bit about ourselves and on a scale of 1 to 5, how much we knew about lesson study. Good to have you, Joe.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Joe, I know you're in service. Can you share with everybody what you teach and how long you've been teaching?
I teach social studies in Toledo Public Schools, and I'm in my 17th year of teaching.
All right, thanks so much. So, all right, so here we go. As each of the presenters begin to present their piece, we'll feel free to introduce ourselves, unless you all want to go now. Okay, we'll introduce ourselves then. All right, so Joanne, if you go back, I'll get started on slide 3, and then we'll progress through our presentation here. So noting that we have a great many people who have heard the term lesson study, but they're not quite sure what it is. This slide is a very brief. I mean, entire books have been written about the topic of lesson study. So take this with a grain of salt, right? Here is kind of a very broad overview, a survey level of what lesson study is. And as we enact it here at BGSU, we follow a model that's been proposed by Catherine Lewis, who was someone who lived and studied in Japan for a number of years. And this model comes from the Japanese model. And there are 4 steps: study, plan, do a research lesson, and then reflect. And in the study phase, what the team of teachers does is collaborate together to identify a very difficult problem. Whenever we're doing a lesson study, we want to be doing it over something that is going to be something that we all find to be a challenge, like a difficulty with our profession. And as we know, as teachers, we have many challenges that face us. And so the question is, what's a challenge that we want to tackle with this particular focus, with this particular lesson study? What's a challenge we want to try to overcome together? It really isn't for simple problems, right? So, or it also isn't for if you have a really great lesson that you want to show off. That's not really what this is for. We want, in lesson study, we want to pull many many professional minds together to overcome a challenge. And so we identify that challenge, and then we go and we seek knowledge about what other people have done, or what other people have written, or what other people have found when they also encountered that challenge. Because we recognize that if we're encountering a challenge, it's likely other people have too. So we go out and we seek to overcome that. What kinds of challenges might teachers be talking about in these days? Well, as you can imagine, one of the challenges might be, how do I be effective in my teaching in an online environment? That is a very, I think, evident lesson study that's been happening across our nation with many groups of teachers in these times. Teachers have also explored other things, such as how do I get my students to persevere in their learning, to just not give up immediately? How do I do that? What can we do as teachers to inspire them to do that? How do we motivate students? How can we know as teachers what might motivate our students, and then plan lessons accordingly? How do we promote social emotional learning in our classrooms? A lot of teachers in recent years have been saying, like, I'm not really sure how to do that. How do I do that? So they team up with a group of professionals, and then they look at it and they study it, and then they come back, and whatever their challenge was, they plan a lesson that they believe, based on their learning, will address that challenge. So the next stage then is planning. And so they get together and they plan a lesson. It's imperative in the planning that the lesson is everybody's lesson, right? No matter which group of students it's going to be taught to, no matter which teacher in the team is going to teach it, it is everybody's lesson. Everybody understands the flow of the lesson. They talk about what questions are going to be asked. They talk about how much time they feel like things are going to take. They talked about and anticipate what students might do, both conceptually correct, conceptually incorrect, procedurally, what kinds of things might students do. We anticipate those so that the person teaching has the most informed view of what the group feels should happen in this lesson, right? And in that case, it's everybody's lesson. So after the planning is done, planning of the lesson to see if we can address the challenge that we face, we actually teach the lesson, and we teach it together at the same time, so to speak. Most typically, the teacher, one of the teachers in the team teaches the lesson to a group of students, and the rest of the team is responsible for looking directly at what are the students doing? What are they learning? What are they thinking? What are they saying? How are they responding? And they're doing this with a focus on the particular challenge that we were trying to overcome. Because we all know as teachers, it seems infinite the number of things we could possibly look at, right? The number of intake variables in a classroom is gigantic. So as we're looking and analyzing what students are doing in the lesson we created as a team, what we're doing is we're looking at the students with a focus of overcoming the challenge. So we're trying to get the data on what's actually happening with the challenge that we're trying to overcome. So after that lesson is taught, then we move on to the fourth stage, which is to reflect. In this stage, all of the data that each individual person collected from the students is then shared with everybody else. We talk about it, we share, we find out, what happened, who did it happen with, who did it not happen with, all those kinds of things, so that as teachers, we get an authentic and honest data set to go on to discuss what was effective about the plan, what actually happened with the students, and what can we improve upon. Based upon those reflections and that data, we revise the lesson and try to improve what we're doing as educators with our students. And so schools have been determining, schools and teacher teams have been determining how many of these they do. On the average, this takes a little bit of time. Some teams work a little bit of time each week over 6 to 8 weeks, and they do 3 lesson studies a year. In Japan, that's about the average, 6 to 8 weeks and 3 lesson studies a year. In the States with schools we've been working with here in Ohio and some other locations, some other states, They've been doing 2 a year. They basically say, well, we have 2 semesters, let's do 1 in the fall and 1 in the spring. And those vary in length. Sometimes they take 4 weeks, sometimes they take 6, just depends on the teacher team. And of course, some teams meet once a week, some meet twice. And so depending on the needs of the team and the district, that's what they do. Like they make their own decisions on when they can meet and how much time they can meet, et cetera, to make this happen. So Joanna, can you share the next slide?
Certainly.
Thank you. So a big broad overview then. A lesson study is actually worldwide. 130 years ago, it is credited to Japan for starting this particular set and flow of teacher collaboration oriented at looking at live research lessons to improve teaching and instruction based on student data that comes directly from the students of that school. So it's practice-based, it's research-oriented, and it's collaborative professional development for us. It promotes in-service teacher growth, and it also promotes pre-service teacher growth when they have the opportunity to take part in a full lesson study. The data also shows that. So another thing that is shown both in research I've done here with students in Ohio and also through research from Perry and Lewis, the students who have teachers who are engaging in lesson study on their standardized tests, we were able to show here in Ohio, those students outperform students of teachers who aren't actually engaged in lesson study. Those teachers might be engaged in other PD, but not doing lesson study. And so that was a very rigorous qualitative study, and you can see the research for that there. Promising innovative adaptions is something that lesson study provides, because as teachers themselves are engaging in these authentic classroom-based research settings, innovations come up. They figure out things that we didn't know before, and then they're sharing those innovations, through places like the Impact Conference, for example, or maybe their state, local, or national conferences with other teachers. Here in the States, I did a look in 2018 at the amount of teacher education institutions that were doing lesson study. And it's not widespread. At that time, lesson study was not widespread in the States like it is in some other countries, such as the Netherlands, Japan, and several nations in Africa now are picking it up. It's widespread in Thailand. It's taking hold in Australia. There's all kinds of places where this is spreading among its teachers like wildfire. And it really hadn't hit us yet, but we do have pockets. We have California's strong pocket, Chicago's a strong pocket, Florida, Texas. There's definitely some states that are really ramping up the opportunity for the teachers to engage in this kind of PD, where they get in their collaborative teams and go through this process in a very rigorous way. So that's kind of where we are. What we notice even less is that BGSU is kind of a hub of uniqueness in that we have a team of teacher educators that actually do lesson study about how effective we are with our pre-service teachers, right? And how we're using lesson study to learn about how we as teacher educators can improve our practice to help our pre-service teachers learn about teaching. All right, we're ready to move on to the next slide.
Let's see. Whoop. Did I go the right way? Oh, yes, we did.
Yes.
There we go.
I'm going to kick it back to Joanna.
Yes. So as I said earlier, I am one of the leaders and directors of Project Impact. And IMPACT actually is an acronym for Improving Motivation, Pedagogy, Assessment, and Collaboration for Teachers. This is a federally funded grant, like Tracy said in the main session when we first opened. And we've got 4 partners: Perrysburg Schools, Springfield, Toledo Public Schools, and Toledo School for the Arts. And the beauty of this is that through Project Impact, we are able to reach out to these partners and provide this professional development and be a part of their lesson study team. So Gabriel has already worked with Springfield schools And it was really fun because in that experience, we actually had some of our senior teacher candidates within that research team. And so they were able to, as undergrads, participate in lesson study and find out what it's all about and be integral members to that research team. Well, this past fall, we were able to begin some lesson study research teams at Toledo School for the Arts. And so Gabriel and I were involved with them, and they, after that experience, that first team, they're like, we want to do this again. So that same team this spring is shifting their focus, whatever that challenge was from the fall. They have a new one that they want to address. We actually just met with them the other day. And this team is going to collaborate to create a new plan. They're kind of in the research. We want to really clarify what our focus is. So they're at their beginning stages, but they opened up a second team this semester. So we're actually running 2 lesson study experiences with Toledo School for the Arts this semester, which is really fun, really exciting, because one of the pieces to lesson study is it empowers teachers as leaders. And that's also part of the vision of Project Impact. We don't want to be the ones who are always the knowledgeable experts. We want, because we have so many experts out in the field, and we want to empower them to partner with us. When we look at our partners, we don't think BGSU up here and the partners underneath us. We are all together and we are all equal and working together. So it's a really exciting grant that we have. And with this opportunity, we've really been able to embrace lesson study and work with our partners. And like I said earlier, before some of you got here, we're like, and we'll take it to South Carolina because we have a South Carolina teacher. You know, it's like Gabriel has gone to many different states across the nation and really worked with lesson study, even internationally. So we're super excited about the opportunities through Project Impact of what we can do to empower teachers nationally within our region as in state, as well as nationally and internationally. It's super exciting. So one of the pieces that we did back in the fall, and Nancy's going to be talking about this soon, is we focused in on leading a discussion, a high leverage practice that we were being challenged with. And we had all decided as a research team, which is the lesson study research team here at Bowling Green, we thought, let's focus on leading a discussion because that was a challenge we all had. So we all did some researched the high leverage practice, looked at the curriculum, and then we were able to bring our ideas together to begin collaborating to create that lesson, that study piece, because there are those 4 stages. The study piece, the first stage, we all went out and did our research before we began planning the lesson together. So this is just a piece of some of what the research was that we brought to the team in order to be able to begin writing that lesson that we did last fall here at BGSU with the methods course, the social studies methods course. And so this is just some of what we looked at specifically in the characteristics of leading a strong discussion and getting students to have that discussion. So these are just little pieces that we used as part of our research and study. And I believe this brings us to Allison, correct?
Yes, thank you. I'm Allison Godey, and I am a teaching professor in the School of Teaching and Learning. My main area of focus is classroom technology methods. And oops, you jumped away from my slide. Good. Bounce back, please. Thank you. There we go. And, you know, we never expected on the onset, as we were planning early for this in January, actually December, January, we were forming our research team. We never anticipated we would have to take this to 100% online. But the reality is, from my perspective, is that it actually went in the way it should have gone. I mean, we were all really already prepared to have a research lesson be conducted. Our team had formed, but we had to begin working remotely, much like all of us had to do. And we actually discovered some new tools, and we learned a little bit differently on how we can collaborate. My initial interest in joining the lesson study team for research was because I really needed to know more about how faculty were integrating technology in their content area classes. Technology is often seen as an additional topic area. And I've always been in the philosophy that it should be seamless, it should be integrated. And this dramatic shift and transition to online really revealed a lot of things about the lesson study process that we were able to automate. So for instance, we began holding our meetings online in Zoom. Therefore, we had recordings and we had different mechanisms for communicating, and each of us had a platform to communicate through. We began using Google Docs. I formulated a couple of templates for us to actually have a standard set of information for us to be able to fill in the blanks as we were communicating and planning and what the research components were going to be. We had checklists. On the previous slide, the previous two slides, you saw the leading a discussion protocol. We developed a spreadsheet so that as we were preparing the lesson, we could also be mindful of the elements of leading a discussion that we were to be using throughout the lesson. And so for myself, that was just such a useful reminder. You know, I could keep open multiple screens and have my checklist for leading the discussion in the background, and I could make reference to that and check off components as we are gathering and collecting information while the lesson was being delivered. I also began working closely with Nancy on the social studies Canvas shell that we were developing for delivery with the students. Nancy is very skillful with technology integration. However, keeping the Canvas template that incorporated a lot of the elements that we wanted to use for the study was going to be a different technical perspective than what she was used to. And so we were together supporting the development of the shell so that students could transition in and out of modalities that we were using to conduct the lesson. And the modalities, I'm speaking in terms of Padlet and using the chat room and using the various recording tools that we had for collecting data. And finally, GoReact. We're fortunate to be able to have an interactive video capturing tool. GoReact allows us to actually, as we've collected video through Zoom, we can import that into GoReact, pause and annotate within the video elements of the leading discussion that we were interested in kind of expanding to take a little closer look at it from the research perspective. So the seamless integration online was not it was challenging, but it also came along and was very sensible and seamless in terms of how we can incorporate using various tools that fit well into the Canvas learning management system, as well as the instructor's capabilities. So while we were conducting the lesson, from my own perspective on the theoretical framework of TPAC, technological, pedagogical, and content knowledge, I witnessed some things that were revealing. The technology for our students, for our methods students at this junior year level, was very native to them. We witnessed a variety of different techniques that the students were using to navigate within that online learning environment. But it also revealed that the depth of knowledge may not have been as deep as what we would have expected with regard to the actual conversation. And Nancy's going to share with you the elements of the lesson and how we actually explored and researched the student interaction with the content. So I will toss to Nancy.
All right, so I would say I've been teaching in silos a lot for many years in my methods class, and this was my great privilege to be able to work with a team and polish a lesson. I think polishing the stones is also a Japanese metaphor for making something shine with observation and collaboration. So my task today is to share with you the content of our lesson and and some of the images that we had students analyze. So this was with a class of 34 senior method students last fall when everything hit and we went directly online. So I hit them hard the first day with what we're calling now in social studies a C3 inquiry. So we have some new national standards that we're following, and they have a strong focus on inquiry. So we had a compelling question and a couple of supporting questions. we accomplished our lesson in I think we had a couple of 2-hour sessions. So we did take some Pomodoro breaks, and you see the Pomodoro timer on the left. So we understood from the get-go that virtual learning and intense virtual learning needed to have real breaks. So I think every 50 minutes, maybe a little bit less, we took a good break. If you're interested in taking a look at this established piece of curriculum coming from the c3teachers.org, you can scan. So we also knew that in the current context, this part of having a vibrant discussion that's actually generative is picking the right question. So we'd had a summer of unrest, and we'd had George Floyd protests and ensuing events. So this was a very timely topic, and we just picked up an established, well, actually I wouldn't say established, but a brand new published inquiry and adapted it for our purposes. So the question was, is there anything different about the 2020 protests? So I think those of the social studies teachers in the room know it's kind of hard picking out the question, like getting a juicy slice of the content that has promise of engaging students. So I was happy to find this one and use it. And I was curious how to answer this question myself. So I know that my peers did some anticipating and predicting and reviewing the images themselves to see what they thought students would say. So that's a good thing. My lesson study colleagues helped me what we call stress test this beautiful question. And we decided ahead of time there was plenty to talk about here. And so we looked at a couple sets of images, and they were guided, these explorations were guided by these two questions that we call supporting questions that support our big compelling question. So we looked at similarities and differences between historic and modern protests that aim to restrict rights of citizens. And KKK would come to mind. So there's a lot of racial history there. And also, what similarities and differences are there between historic and modern protests that aim to protect the rights of citizens? So the next couple of slides are just a look at some of the images. We looked at a lot of images, and we tried to build some real racial history for ourselves. And we used a strategy. Bruce Lesh, he wrote this amazing book called Why Don't You Just Tell Me the Answers? And he's a history educator. So he talks about text, context, and subtext. So it was useful for us in promoting discussion in small groups where students broke out. They had a template. I modeled analysis, and we began to dig in and become engrossed in these images. So just quickly, text, context, and subtext. I'll run you through these images with that source analysis framework. So text means not just for text, but text means what are you looking at and what is the thing that you're seeing. Context is what aren't you seeing, and what is surrounding, what is the history and context surrounding what image you're looking at. And subtext is obviously reading between the lines and trying to detect a message. So the first image on the left is a 1925 Kkk rally after to me, an astonishing event, a 30,000 person parade down Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington. So this was a culminating event to that day in 1925. So you see a speaking podium at the center with Klansmen circling the podium. after a parade that was racist and anti-Semitic images of people marching 22 abreast, 14 rows deep. You can see video of this event. And the front page headline in the Post the next day was "White Robed Klan cheered on march to nation's capital." So it was a different time. The KKK at the time, as far as context, was at the height of its popularity. There were fears of Catholic and Jewish immigrants, as well as Northern African migration, wage issues. This is leading up to the Great Depression. Prohibition also played a role. And my assumption from looking at this picture is that white supremacy has some kind of a sanction. So not only this image, but the images of those parades. And on the right, interestingly, this is 2017. And this is the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. And if you'll remember, it was a group of about 100 white supremacists, neo-Nazis, white nationalists with tiki torches. And there were salutes and chanting and slogans, including "You will not replace us" and "White Lives Matter." And if you'll notice in the center of the image on the right, there's some very interesting seated people. This is a group of counter protests, and they're seated at the base of a statue of Thomas Jefferson on the campus of the University of Virginia. So we asked students to take a look at the past and the present. If you go ahead, Joanna, and showed the second set of images. So we also looked at protests in the past that past and present, that aimed to protect rights. And many of my students, myself included, we didn't know much or anything about the protest on the right. That is in New York City, 1917, NAACP silent protest parade. So 10,000 Black men, women, children marching to a beat silently, demanding justice. Signs included "Make America Safe for Democracy. We march because we deem it a crime to be silent in the face of such barbaric acts." And the barbaric acts were an East St. Louis attack on a rapidly expanding and building Black community. So dozens of Black residents were killed, thousands left homeless with their homes burned. So the subtext for me is a curious, peaceful, silent protest, a notable lack of police presence. And then you compare that with obviously the George Floyd riots from this past summer. It seems like it's so much longer ago. The end of May, when George Floyd was murdered, and the Minnesota governor called out the National Guard. I read up a little bit on, every time I talk about these images, I learn a little bit more, but there were almost 7,000 National Guards people in Minneapolis to try to help quell the violence. So I think the subtext from this image for me is that the protests are similar in their objectives, but they look a lot different these many years later, with police presence and escalating violence. So I think the take home for us as we looked at these images was there's a lot to discuss and figure out. So not only are the questions about how do protests that aim to protect rights and aim to limit rights different, but why are they still going on? So we felt like, in spite of the environment and the context, And with the help of the team and the technology that we embedded, the conversations were substantive. The technology and the platform had some limits. So I guess one thing I learned was maybe don't overuse tools. If you can keep it simple and you've got a tough set of questions to explore, the tools can help, but as Allison noted and my other team members noted, they did inhibit some of the conversations while students were trying to figure them out. But I think
I'll tap on that, Nancy. I think
go ahead.
Emphasize, in the conversations as we were witnessing the lesson and the students' engagement, we provided templates that allowed the students, just facilitated the discussion, and they were more concerned about what it is we wanted them to put into the template rather than really having a conversation about what the images showed. So the technology really facilitated the conversation, but the students were more concerned about, navigating and submitting and putting in the right answers.
That's good. I think that's what I have. Yep. There's some examples from our Padlet where the groups were trying to use the text context and subtext tool to draw some conclusions, quite powerful conclusions.
And that would bring us to Jeremy. Do you want to talk about the research and the goal and everything?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Jeremy Nadler. I am teaching professor in career tech and workforce education. I am a former marketing education DECA teacher, 22 years. So yeah, and just to kind of piggyback on what we experienced as a team, it was fascinating. We actually observed silently ghosts, and there was some really excellent discussion. I would agree with Allison that some of the conversation was, what exactly do they want? And, centered kind of around the technology or issues with the technology. But overall, it was excellent. And remember, the focus of the lesson was to facilitate discussion, right? And so, yeah, it was truly, it was amazing. Gabriel and I had taken a look at the pictures prior to Nancy delivering the lesson, and I think we engaged in an hour-long conversation with them. So it was excellent. But I'm just going to go over.
We didn't even get through all the pictures because
no,
the few that we looked at went so deep in our conversation.
It was excellent, it really was. So I'm just going to go over research question, goal, and then kind of what we took from it all. So remember that our lesson research question was, during remote instruction, in what ways do digital tools promote the lesson study process and ultimately affect teacher educator and teacher candidate learning? I'm not sure if Gabriel mentioned it, but lesson study traditionally is done face-to-face. And so we set out to examine how digital tools might broaden that whole lesson study process when collaboration instruction takes place remotely. Next slide, if you will, please. And findings really did suggest that digital tools undoubtedly promoted lesson study. It allowed for rigorous collaboration, synchronous observation, data collection, and feedback. And so we, without a doubt, as a team, deemed the digital tools effective, and it changed how online instructional planning can be research analyzed and written collaboratively. As some of my colleagues have already expressed, really the general benefits of lesson study is that it reduces teacher isolation, which is very near and dear to my heart, and I'll kind of go into that after covering these bullet points. But it builds collaboration, and if we had to kind of put it all in a nutshell as far as a reflection, I think that's the next slide, actually. No matter distance, educators across universities, schools, or districts can integrate online lesson study into remote education programs, online courses, while engaging students in learning using digital tools that promote engagement, peer interaction, and student voice. But, you know, to kind of go back to the idea of teacher isolation, collaboration, I spent 22 years at Defiance High School. For those of you know Defiance, just 45 minutes west of here. And it was very much a lonely 21 years there. 1 year was down in Cincinnati. I'm sorry if I said 22 years. And I don't think that that's unique for me. I think that in secondary education specifically, unless you belong to a big department, you are very much isolated in your classroom. And besides a half an hour to scarf down lunch and 3 minutes in between periods, you know, you don't get that interaction with other teachers all too much. And so lesson study to me, you know, is an unbelievably powerful tool that can break down those barriers, break down those silos, as Nancy has you know, had mentioned. And certainly at the university level, you know, this is only my second year, but I definitely very early on saw the silos. And so we are proof that the collaboration is amazing. And isn't that what we want? Ultimately, to better ourselves professionally, but more importantly, to better the learning of our students. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of lesson study.
Well, Jeremy, I think you said something really important, because we work in our silos or within our departments. And the beauty of lesson study is we have a tech person, we have a career tech person in workforce ed, we have social studies, language arts, and math, and we all did this together. So we went across departments to bring expertise from all of these different content areas to create this lesson in a social studies classroom, which could actually, what we were focused on could apply to any one of our classrooms. And that's the beauty of this collaboration, is it doesn't just have to be social studies teachers talking together, or language arts, or career tech, workforce ed, or technology. You can cross the content areas and have these collaborative conversations, which help improve everybody's instruction, because you're all doing it together. And, you know, and we just choose, you know, you're sitting in your group and it's like, who's going to teach this? Because we all created that lesson together. And I'm going to move to really quick to the next slide and then stop sharing my screen for a minute, because I think the next piece is really important. Is, all right, so all of you who are here with us, we just gave you a lot of information about how lesson study worked for us, as well as giving a little example, you know, that we did it at Springfield, we did it at TSA. But what I want to ask you now, and this might take you, you know, give you 45 seconds to think about, how could you see this applying to your own school?
Or any questions that you have.
Absolutely.
How realistic is it?
Well, for me, my school is like very team and collaborative based. Like, I was very worried going into the classroom that it was going to be very isolating. And I think the most isolating part for me has been this year. But in general, we like really, I'm in 7th grade in middle school. So we do a lot of team-based planning. We work together very well. And then I also have PLCs with my content in my grade meetings every single week, which is really awesome to have the opportunity to collaborate together and plan together. And I don't feel so alone. And so I think something like this would definitely work very well in my school. Just collaborating together to come up with some common problems that all 3 of us social studies 7th grade teachers are having, some legitimate issues beyond just like the typical things, but diving into 7th grade motivation behind completing their assignments, and especially in this online environment, I think it would be amazing to work together and see what we could do. And especially they're hybrid and I'm 100% virtual. So it'd be interesting to see the results if we were all implementing the same type of lesson.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Somebody else, what are you thinking?
I'm at Perrysburg, we have 12 math teachers and we collaborate a lot. And when we're not in a pandemic, we have time every week to do that. I like the idea, though, of bringing in people from other departments to get different points of view. It's not something we've ever tried or considered.
And Erin, thank you for contributing that. At TSA, we had, now Gabriel, you're going to have to help me, but we had language arts, we had 2 math, and they're actually the ones who did the lesson, the same lesson in both of their classes with different students. And then we had, was it theater or art?
Music, yeah.
Music, okay. So we had all the different contents, and it was fascinating when you get the different lenses coming in on the same problem. It's like, okay, how could we deal with this? Have you thought about this? The number of times the art and music, I remember Jay would contribute, and it was, everyone would just kind of stop and go, oh, yeah, I didn't think about doing it that way. And this is an art school, you know? And I agree with you. I love collaboration within the content area, but breaking outside of that to get those other ideas, absolutely. It was really beautiful to watch. It really was. Somebody else, what are you thinking?
I think it's important to also note that, I mean, to do it within your school would be ideal, but you know, our study proved that through digital tools, you could collaborate with somebody, you know, across the United States or around the world. It doesn't have to be limited to just within your school too.
I'm glad you said that, Jeremy, because we have done that. Gabriel and I participated in a public lesson study that was out in, was it San Francisco, California? So we engaged and really, and the whole pandemic really forced us into this thinking outside the box mentality. But all of us require professional development with tech integration, and that's because it's evolving so fast. Even this past 12 months, I've learned more in 12 months than I have in my 20-year, 2 decades career being a tech integration specialist. You know, we have vast resources. We've got multiple modalities for instruction. We've got, you know, a variety of different equipment. What works best? You know, the platforms. How do we plug it in? What kind of tech support is needed by faculty? And what ways are they integrating? And so through this, you know, we really get a lens on not just best practices, but multiple ways of making things work so that we can get the input from the students. Because when we give the students their own voice and we empower them to help us learn what they know, we really can enable them to take a deeper dive into the content and facilitate the content that we didn't know they didn't know. And so that really was becoming apparent throughout the lesson study process. And if I hadn't jumped in, I too would never have understood why it can be so challenging to move into an online learning environment. And that was very informative. The whole perspective of lesson study was for everyone. We weren't just examining what Nancy was doing with this particular topic. We were all contributing to our professional development as a team.
Gabriel, do you want to suggest maybe some resources for these folks if they want to dive into lesson study a little more?
Yeah, let me grab something.
We were working.
I'm on the spot.
I know, it's like, okay, let me get some. There you go. The teaching. Love that book.
That's number one. I would just, it's an easy read. Like, look how big the words are on the page. Like, it's not some, it's not some itty bitty textbook, right? Like it's a good read. And I think all teachers will enjoy it. If you haven't read The Teaching Gap, that's where you start. And chapter 7 is all about lesson study. And I think it'll rock your world.
Well, and we also have a
must. It's a
we
must.
also have, I'm sorry, Jeremy, I did not mean to step on you.
No, I was just going to say it's a must read for pre-service teachers. It's like, especially for pre-service.
Yeah, well, we got a lot out of it. You know, there's so many connections you can make. Also, there's a lesson study. Do you have it with you, Gabriel? I'm going to make you move again because otherwise I have to run upstairs to my dogs. Yes, this is, and I'm not trying to be offensive, but this is like lesson studies for dummies. You know how you have dogs for dummies and how to raise dogs and marketing for dummies and this for dummies. This is like lesson study for dummies. It's like step by step, really applicable, really understandable, step by step how you do it. And it is an easy read, phenomenal read. If you are interested, and I know we're coming down to our time, but if you're interested, and Erin, and this goes out to anybody at any of the districts, but if you're interested in engaging in lesson study, please, please, please reach out to us. What we can all do, Gabriel, if you want to put your email in the chat, I'll put mine in the, everyone.
And also you see there's a request for the authors of these texts that you're showing us.
Oh, thank you, I did not see that. Gabriel will quickly get his fingers exercising. It's cold down here in my basement. My fingers are like cold. Anyway, yes, we'll put the authors there, but we want you to reach out to us because we would be happy to work with you and help you get started on lesson study. I know Perrysburg and Springfield, TPS, TSA, their administrators are all aware of what we're working on here and what we would love to do. And Gabriel initially started off saying kind of we're a hub here at BGSU, but it's super exciting. This is like professional development that is so collaborative, inspiring, motivating, working with your colleagues just in a different mindset, really worthwhile. So if you want to reach out to us, we would love to work with you. And I just want to say thank you for all of you being here today.
If I could take the mic for just a second, I want to circle back over to Karen because I know she's in our College of Business at the university and recognize that she found alignment in the supply chain content with regard to how we do lesson study. And I also want to just note that in the College of Business, the CADL department through Steve Cady produced a BGSU LibGuide for best practices transitioning to online. And that is so relevant at this point in time. If you don't mind, I'm going to put the URL to the LibGuide here in the chat. And I want to thank the College of Business folks too. Karen, I don't know if you had participated in the powwows that was going on to help us develop the tool to recognize the essential practices of teaching online. But I also find that to be a very important element and a good representation of collaboration.
And Karen, again, if the business school, if you've got people and colleagues who are excited, and you tell them about lesson study and they're asking about it, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to talk to them because we would love to see this type of collaboration and discussion and growth across the university, across the colleges. This isn't just an education thing. So it's really exciting to have you here as well. Any other comments, questions before Brooks jumps in here?
Well, I think what you're talking about goes to that out of your silo collaboration. At a university, our silos sometimes are a little bit larger. They're based on our college or our department. And one of the things that we've really tried to do is to reach out beyond our parameters. So the committee that Allison was referring to is CADL, our Committee to Advance Teaching and Learning, that we kind of created to make sure that within our college we were sharing tips and to invite others across the university to join in as we had meetings and found these kind of initiatives like this LibGuide. This was done based on sending things out across the entire university, all the faculty, and trying to get their ideas, their concerns, where were they having issues and how can we help each other. So I think that idea of collaboration never gets old.
Thank you, Karen. Hey, Joe, did you have something you want to say? Because we don't want to skip over the top of you.
No, it was nothing big at all. So I teach in a synchronous distance learning environment under typical times where I've got kids on a video screen, and I just made a note to myself, I can't believe we haven't been doing this already, because there are only 3 of us that do this, and we've never actually talked about what does work in a lesson when we've got kids from 6 different schools at the same time. So I definitely want to pursue this more.
And that's a challenge, right? So that's an awesome thing to undertake with other professionals. I love that. Thanks for adding that.
And we're in social studies, Chinese, and calculus. So it's not like we're quite aligned, but I really think just the nature of thinking about the way we do our lessons and working together on that would be fantastic.
Well, yeah, and the challenges that you probably have similar challenges, you know,
Yeah,
and it's like, okay, how do we overcome this? Let's figure this out together. Absolutely.
Yeah, the fact that we've been doing this for 9 years and have never actually sat down and talked about it is kind of ridiculous the more I think about it.
Well, I would say that the technology and being online has really availed all of us to have a voice. You know, we're spending less time traveling, and we just heard from our dean last week about how we use our time more efficiently, doing things in a more virtual environment. I think that's just such an important thing. What we can do together, our lesson study team truly accomplished so much so quickly. We had to turn this around from our original plan in February, and immediately we're writing proposals for how we did this online exclusively and prepared this for the fall. So I know our team thumbs up would be like, yes, we really did. I see heads shaking. We really moved so fast to make this work, and
Gabriel,
it's a village.
Sorry, Allison. Gabriel, you stacked.
Yeah, so I think just some of the things that Karen noted, and I just love having her here actually, because it brought this up for me in my mind. Something upon reflection, Karen, I'm a full professor now and have been since 2018. But in reflecting on that process, I legitimately asked myself hard questions about whether or not the process forced me into isolation that I didn't want, or whether or not it helped promote collaboration. And my ultimate answer is I felt I had no choice but to isolate to get particular aspects of what needed to be done to prove myself as an academic. And in reflecting on that, this team has moved forward and spent extra time working on documents to try to ask our unit to move forward to think about what are some things that we can put in our RTP documents that reduce this kind of isolation that in some cases we need, right? So we can do particular things to prove ourselves, but in other cases to make us better and less isolated and to learn from others and to improve collaboration. And so we're working on that now in our unit. And so we're not sure where this is going to go with our college or the university, but at least we're having these conversations within the School of Teaching and Learning.
And I think that's key. And we've had those conversations. It really goes to that kind of organizational development aspect of organizational change. We've got to make sure the rewards align with what we're trying to encourage our people to do. And we had real concerns about a lot of these things. So we're taking a risk in the classroom, and part of our evaluations is the perceptions of the students. And if they don't like what we tried, how does that impact people going through that tenure track? Or, I'm a QRF faculty, so we get reviewed even more often. So, getting a ding somewhere, it's going to have even more of an impact. So looking at how your organization has set up those rewards, talk to your principals, your administrators about, can I take a chance? What's the repercussions if I try something new and it doesn't work as well as I'd hoped? Do I get rewarded for making the attempt, or is there some punishment that's involved with that?
I see Nancy has a stack here. I'm just going to let us know that it is 10:31 and the second session will begin at 10:45. So I don't want to stop conversation, but I want everyone to be cognizant of our time. Go for it, Nancy.
Okay, yeah, people can go, but I've just reminded of the knowledgeable other part. We didn't talk about that related to lesson study, but it is really interesting to have someone with a different view come into your team. And I consider Gabriel to be one of those people. He's a lesson study coach in my mind, and he's a knowledgeable other. So just think of your colleagues, who might those be that can help facilitate those conversations for you.
Great. Well, I want to thank everybody for participating in this first session. And I'm going to direct you back to the schedule for today. So you'll take a look and see that breakout sessions for session 2 start at 10:45, and the Zoom meeting rooms are listed. It's the same Zoom link for each room. So if you wanted to be in this one, you can just hang out here. But I really appreciate our presenters today. I don't know if we can all applaud into our screens. Thank you all. And thank you all for joining us. It's really impressive to see teachers choosing to be here, pre-service or in service, choosing to be here on Saturday morning. Thank you all very much, and have a great next session.